Well, welcome to the 700 Club Canada. This has been a week of hope. We've had very important conversations, and today we're going to talk about post-traumatic stress. Post-traumatic stress disorder rates are elevated among young people and healthcare workers amid the coronavirus pandemic. Some studies have found that psychologists and psychiatrists have seen rising rates of the disorder, which is characterized by things like nightmares, flashbacks, difficulty sleeping, avoidance of situations that might remind the person of the trauma and other lasting symptoms that impair their functioning. Well, doctors say people who have had severe COVID-19 infections are likely to face a higher risk, and psychiatry research found that earlier in the pandemic, about 32% of young adults had high levels of PTSD symptoms. Well, joining me today to close out our week of hope and unpack PTSD are psychologist Dr. Mary Lynn and healing communication consultant and coach Andrew Blackwood. Well, welcome back. Thank you so much, Mary and Andrew. We're missing Harrison today, but thank you for being with us again.
You're welcome.
Pleasure.
What is PTSD and what are some misconceptions from a professional point of view? Mary?
Right. The word trauma is thrown around a lot, but to actually get diagnosed with PTSD, there are some particular criteria you have to meet. So you actually have to experience one or more traumatic events. And it's sort of beyond the norm type of events. And but it doesn't become PTSD, with D standing for disorder, unless the symptoms last for longer than 30 days. And so some of the symptoms would be like recurring flashbacks, dreams, intense psychological distress if they're exposed to something that reminds them of that trauma. There can often be a loss of memory for some aspects of their trauma, but then having really, really detailed memories for things that are not even relevant to it, like smells or certain colors. There's a huge avoidance strategy. They don't want to think about the thoughts or the experiences, the emotion. They just want to shut it all down. And often a hypervigilant, exaggerated, startle response. These are all the things that we start to see when people are experiencing PTSD. Now, with some of the misconceptions is that I can just white knuckle my way through. When I put it aside, I'm not thinking about it. I'm not even thinking about it. I'm fine. And that's sort of the common response. Right. The other one for people who are frontline workers who are regularly exposed to vicarious trauma. So it may not have happened to them, but they're responding to people with traumatic events. It begins to wear on them. Mm-hmm. And there is the misconception that I can just keep being exposed to this and I will be okay. Right. And I'll just push through it. And unfortunately, that's not how trauma works. In fact, if trauma is kind of tucked in the brain and you don't have a chance to process it, if you can picture like this garbage bin where everything's shoved in there and these leaky toxins start to come out, and it affects the way you react, it affects your health, it affects the way you see things. People will tend to have a bit more of a negative, cynical worldview, and you actually end up becoming less able to do the job that you love doing because all of these effects are happening and they're not being dealt with.
Wow, that is super helpful. Andrew, any other thoughts on that?
I just want to tag on to the whole idea of unprocessed experiences. Sometimes we defend, we guard against them by not going there, but that is the way through it. We've got to go through it to come out on the other side, and we don't need to do it alone. Mm-hmm. And I think that's part of the challenge as well. We haven't had experiences with helpful guides to be with us, to be still in those moments where we would rather run, to learn that we can tolerate it. Physically, we've survived, right? But there's a part of us that gets to come awake and alive to that strength and that resilience so that we can move through and process it, because our worldview is changed. Right. Something has happened. And we've internalized this meaning about whatever it is has happened. Right. And unless we explore and discover that and then rewrite that, we'll forever live with that that meaning and that idea, when in fact that might not be entirely true.
Wow, that's really, really helpful. So, there's a lot of financial hardship. So maybe PTSD isn't always about, we often associate that with those who have gone to war, in a sense, or been through terribly traumatic experiences. But we're seeing financial hardship. Can we have PTSD as a result of that? And even pandemic hardship? What would that look like? Andrew, what do you think?
Yes, I know trauma is a word that we kind of throw around a lot. I think there's a reality that experiences that we have, they're so personal. So the way that one event impacts one person, it may impact another person in a completely different way. So the idea of being in a situation where you're not going to be able to fend for yourself or take care of yourself, it's really easy to those thoughts to kind of spiral that, I'll never be able to recover. I'll never be able to take care of my family. And that's a very, very difficult place to live. Feeling that sense, a loss of power and a loss of control, it's really difficult to sit with. It really is.
Yeah, and that can be a form of trauma. Mary, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, a trauma actually is a overarching description of a number of different ways that people respond to traumatic or stress responses. So there's a diagnosis called adjustment disorder, and that would probably be the one that would be the formal term that we use to describe somebody who's going through financial hardship. So it's almost like their system can no longer cope with the enormity of the stress that they're dealing with, and it causes psychological and physical harm to the person who's going through that. So it's not the formal diagnosis of PTSD, but it really does look a lot like it.
Yeah, interesting. What's your advice to people working in the front lines of this pandemic? You touched on this, Mary, earlier, and possibly experiencing what we might call compassion fatigue. Maybe we'll need to define that term. Andrew, what are your thoughts?
I think so many of people, well, they're in the helping profession. It's part of their DNA to be helpful. And a lot of the times there's no off switch to that. And we don't give ourselves permission to take care of ourselves. And just because you leave work doesn't mean that work leaves you. So it's important to have ways to take care of yourself. I know the demand. My wife is a frontline worker and was supporting. She's a nurse, so she was supporting people, and especially when it was just happening and nobody really knew how you could really contract it and what was safe and what wasn't. In addition to trying to help people, is that fear and concern that I'm vulnerable. I'm vulnerable. So finding ways to acknowledge that and to take care of ourselves is important. We don't necessarily have good self-care practices where we withdraw, and we talked about this earlier in the week, where we rejuvenate ourselves, where we rest. It's very difficult, but it's very important to have those things.
Well, compassion fatigue. I mean, these people on the front lines that are serving others, Mary, what does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, people who enter the field of any type of interaction with people, and you're caring for people, responding to their needs, typically enter because they genuinely want to help people. They're full of compassion and empathy. So some of the best people in the fields are actually going to be more susceptible to compassion fatigue because you're out there and you're giving and you're giving. And what happens is that it's not a perpetually flowing bucket of compassion that we have. Eventually it starts to dry out and it becomes difficult. Some of the symptoms of compassion fatigue are when you almost start to become flatline in your emotions. You start to kind of want to run away if somebody with more needs comes along. You can have a more cynical viewpoint. You can feel depressed. And the challenge with that is people who are compassionate by nature, they will experience those symptoms and beat themselves up and think, oh, no, I just have to try harder. What's wrong with me? all to love people. Those are all the things that can make it very difficult. So the response is to be able to go, I am human. I am finite in how much I can give.
Yeah.
And if my body's starting to tell me that I'm starting to have compassion fatigue, I need to slow things down. I need to take care of myself, all the things like Andrew said.
Yeah.
And so there are, we could even put onto the 700 Club website some different questionnaires that people can fill out that can help them determine what their level of compassion fatigue is, burnout, vicarious trauma. And I would suggest that frontline workers check yourself regularly, make sure you're doing okay.
Well, that's really helpful advice, and we'll be right back with more. Well, I'm learning so much today. Thank you to the two of you. Let me ask you this. Why is the fear of the unknown such a significant factor in our mental and emotional health? You both have mentioned this a few times. Mary, your thoughts?
Well, our brains are wired for survival, and it learns how to track all the data that we're possibly in danger. And our brains then begin to predict the likelihood of us encountering danger based on patterns that we've experienced in the past. Well, the challenge is when everything's unknown, we don't have the ability to pick up on the data that cues us that we may be in danger. Right. So uncertainty adds this whole layer of unpredictability where we don't know how to respond, and we also don't know how long it's going to go for. Right. That state of the uncertainty, not knowing if I'm in danger or not being able to read the signals, that can create a lot of dysregulation for people when they're dealing with that.
Well, and we're living...
I was just going to say, part of the challenge is that when your brain is in that mode, you're automatically going to think about the worst case scenario. Right. You've invented it all already.
Right. Mm-hmm. And when you're living in a time of uncertainty, you are forecasting the worst scenarios, right? And if you watch a lot of news a lot of time, you can just always be anticipating the worst outcome. Andrew, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, certainly. I totally agree that uncertainty, it can breed anxiety. And because the truth is, we aren't sure of many things. I don't know exactly when this conversation is going to end, but I'm not freaked out about it, right? There is a degree of uncertainty that we are okay with. But what we are not aware of is when we start to fill in the blanks, we start to fill in the gaps with negative imaginations, right? And if we're not really aware of the details of them, they can still be there, but they're under the surface. So we feel this anxiety and we're not exactly sure what we're anxious about. And that can be really problematic where we don't really kind of tune in to what we're actually anticipating, what we're thinking, what we're imagining about the future, because then we can't challenge it.
And I think that your whole point about community all week, it's really important how we talk about these things in community, because if we're perpetually facing this uncertain time and bad news on the news or however we're sourcing our information, if we perpetuate those conversations, that also breeds fear, doesn't it? It's just like a hot pot for it. So it's really important how we interact in our community with each other about these things. Let me ask you this. What does the Bible say about PTSD? Are there any examples of people with what we now call PTSD in the Bible? Andrew?
Well, as you know, as you imagine, you wouldn't find PTSD in the Bible. Right. But the Bible is filled with stories of difficult challenges and moments that people experience and their reactions to it. So we catch glimpses of maybe parts and pieces of what could be experienced as PTSD or stress, drama, trauma, all of that stuff. But Job definitely comes to mind. He experienced loss after loss after loss. And it's as you read it, you can see the distress. You can see him wondering, like, what's happening, what's going on. Um, but thankfully, there is a resolve that he comes back to. Though worms destroy this body, yet in my flesh will I see God. There's a sense that God is here. And as much as he's crying out to God, he's crying out to God because he knows that God is there, right? So I love his experience. It's a real human. It gives us human insight and an opportunity to see that no matter what we're going through is the objective.
Yeah.
Through we go through, but we can also grow through, and I think that's an important thing to hold on to.
Oh, I love it. We can go through and we can grow through. Thank you for that. Mary, what are your thoughts on biblical examples of this?
Oh, yeah, I think there's plenty. If you kind of read between the lines, I think about David when he was on the run for his life. And, in the scripture, he'd be talking about dreams and the typical symptoms that you would see. You see him as this incredibly strong warrior, and yet he kind of moved into this place of almost fear-based avoidance. And again, that speaks to me of possible PTSD. But what I love about the Bible is how it normalizes that as human beings, we will have these types of struggles. We will need to lean on the Lord when we go through these difficult times. And that's, in fact, what got David through. This is not something we're meant to try to just white knuckle through on our own, that we are to reach out for help and support and through prayer as well.
No, I love it. And I love Jesus' words. You will have trouble in this world. He doesn't promise us a stress-free, pain-free life, but he says, I've overcome the world. So that's what we've been talking about all week, the hope that we find when no matter what we're going through, we can grow through because God is with us in that. And certainly helps us overcome. So in your final thoughts on this today, what are steps that people can take toward wholeness? And that can be in all areas of our life. And Andrew, I'll start with you.
I definitely believe God is always at work in us, on our behalf. So tuning into that, discovering what God is doing, reminding ourselves that he has a plan and that there is healing in every moment for us, every single moment. I used to try to race through and just get out of trouble and get out of problems when I'm realizing now, I can slow things down so I can experience authority in the moment, not just over the moment, but in the moment. So there are opportunities when we can't still the storm and speak peace to the storm outside. We can learn to speak peace to the storm inside. And that's really valuable, I find.
I love that. I too can relate. I love to avoid and get rid of the pain real quickly, but I've been learning to sit in it and experience God in it. So it's a great word. Mary, your thoughts?
Yeah, you mentioned it. Avoidance. I like to call avoidance as the kryptonite to mental health, because if you're not dealing with it, it just accumulates, and your life becomes smaller and smaller. Your window of tolerance decreases, your ability to be resilient decreases. So I would say to people who may be struggling with PTSD is to please honor your story. It needs to be told. It needs to be shared. By virtue of just sharing your story, especially with somebody who's wise and supportive and empathetic and can pray for you, can be so healing. In doing that, we're moving from post-traumatic stress disorder to post-traumatic growth. And we can take the most difficult situations, and as we choose to lean into it and we choose to invite God into it, we grow and we learn in our character, grow in our faith, and we grow in our resilience as well.
Well, that is it, and that is why we have hope. Thank you both so much for being with us all this week, for your insight and just for your heart and how you serve people. I know I've learned a lot, and I know our viewers have. Thank you. Well,
You're
up
welcome.
next, PTSD, infidelity, and separation, how a doomed marriage was saved. Watch this.
Your CBN family has prepared something especially for you. It's a CBN Family Christmas, right in your own home. We've gathered holiday memories, miracle stories, and behind-the-scene glimpses with our hosts, all to bring you the warmth and love of the Christmas season. There'll be recipes and crafts, festive music, and family-friendly holiday films and concerts. Download the free CBN Family app and join your CBN family this season.
Kathy and I met my first year in the Marine Corps, and we got married a year later.
We decided we were going to have kids pretty quick, so we had 3 children back to back.
I did a lot of deployments overseas. I'd be gone for a couple of months, and then I'd be home for a couple of months, and I'd be gone again.
I felt really alone, just really depressed, and I thought all I was mom. 9/11 happened. He came home and said that he wanted to be able to help fight this war on terror.
I believed in my job in Afghanistan, and I believed it was the most important thing in the world, and I was privileged to get to do it.
I knew how to take care of my home. I knew how to take care of my family. But one thing I didn't know how to do was really support my husband with the struggles he was dealing with.
Coming home from Afghanistan was the hard part because I just felt like things made sense there. And when I came home, I'm going into my wife's world where I'm impeding on her system of being a mom. I felt like I was in the way.
He just kept himself distant. I just really never could feel a connection. And so just like in every marriage that, you start becoming distant from each other and you're feeling unsatisfied. I didn't have joy with my marriage.
I was diagnosed with PTSD. I felt the physical symptoms of my face going numb, arms going numb, and I just felt in this state of just complete desperation.
We don't really understand the struggles of post-traumatic stress, and so I didn't know how to recognize that in him. The first month or 2, I was able to comfort him through it, but it wasn't long before the anger would start.
I didn't really know what to do, but I had done martial arts my whole life. I'd wrestled and done jiu-jitsu, and I'd already fought as a professional fighter. So my counselor and my wife recommended that I go try to do that. I felt like I had found the cure because while I was wrestling on those mats, I couldn't think about the things that were giving me anxiety. I would spend like 10, 12 hours a day wrestling on the mats and training, and then Kathy encouraged me to open a school. So I started fighting professionally again and teaching.
He put everything he had into that, like everything else, but I watched him do all these things, and never did he put that effort into our marriage. And I craved that. I longed for that. And now here we are, 10 years into our marriage, and it's still not happening. And once his fame came with having that gym and having the professional fights, women came into his life.
I surrounded myself with a bunch of people that just told me everything I wanted to hear, and no one that was telling me the things I needed to hear. My anger was out of control. My home was like, it's not a home. It was not a happy place to be. My children were scared of me. My wife was scared of me.
And I pretty much came to a point where I said, choose our family or enough is enough. He chose the direction he was going, and so we separated and we sold our home, and my children experienced the pain that came with a broken home.
It was probably the hardest thing I ever did was sitting my kids down and trying to explain to them how this was going to be better, and it wasn't. And I became very depressed and suicidal and really struggled with taking my own life.
I was so broken, I was so hurt that I didn't know what to do. I had a relationship with the Lord. I loved the Lord. I knew the Lord. But I never truly got on my knees to surrender to the Lord. My kids would see me just lay in the bed, crying all the time. I couldn't function. And so I opened the book called Power of a Praying Wife by Stormy R. Martin, and I began praying for my husband. And the Lord began to show me my faults in the marriage. Then that turned into, God, allow me to see Chad the way you see Chad, and help me to love him the way you love him. And the most important thing was help me to forgive him the way you forgave him, because I can't live a life like this for the rest of my life.
And then one day, when the divorce papers were all filed and signed and ready to execute, Kathy came to me.
I say to him, everything everything that you do, you accomplish, you achieve, you rise above and beyond. But when it comes to our family, you quit.
It just really convicted me. I mean, she was just absolutely right. And I made a decision right at that moment that that I had caused the damage, I was gonna fix it. And I began to renew my relationship with God on a level that I had never experienced before. That's when the real restoration came.
It was almost harder taking my husband back and working through restoration than it was actually going through it and being hurt. But I was to a place that I was able to bring it to the cross every morning, and I was ready to move forward.
I would never have dreamed that I'd be in a marriage that I am now.
Our marriage at this point is just outstanding. I have a marriage that I had always wished for.
Now, after starting our foundation, which is Mighty Oaks Warrior Programs, we've had 838 graduates come through our program.
Our goal is to not just work with the PTSD victim and move on. We actually want to get in, work with the families, and restore the whole family.
It's never too late. God takes old things and makes them new, and not only makes them new, but makes them even better than you could ever imagine.
Wow, I have learned so much this week, and I bet you have too. And I think that what's important is just remembering, no matter what you're going through, we've been reminded to lean into community and know that God is with you. And there is always hope. We don't need to be stuck in any of these things that are brought on by stress or anxiety, but God is with us, will bring us through. We can go through it and we can grow through it. I love that. We have resources for you, a beautiful package of resources, free for your asking. You just need to call 1-855-759-0700. There's specific resources and the Book of Hope, which you might want for yourself or a loved one. Please call us, because 24/7 we're here for you for prayer. We are a listening ear. We will pray for you and provide help for you. 1-855-759-0700. We are giving you the message of hope today. You're not alone. The Lord is with you. We are here to support you. So please don't hesitate to call us. Isaiah 55:8-9, a beautiful verse, says this: "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." Isn't that a great reminder that our God is greater than anything, even our own thoughts? So turn to Him today. Thanks for watching.
To contact us, visit 700club.ca.